Dare you lay your hands on an Englishman, you cabbage-eating hounds?
It can't be a coincidence that Flashman always ends up in the soup. Well, that's aside from him being a fictional character in a book series. Even though in his narrative he is constantly trying to shirk and avoid danger, he is always in at the deep end, and he usually gets the job done, to a degree. In this packet, we'll take a look at why, on a mission of daring, cunning and subtlety, the very man is usually Flashman. We all know that Flashman is a bully, a liar, a womaniser, a coward, and is irresistible. But there is so much more to him. With the depth and flexibility of the character, Fraser is able to set scenes of farce using Harry's clumsiness or cowardliness, or can change the humour using Harry's wit. Fraser can set scenes of action and excitement at the most famous events of the age, because he can place Harry almost anywhere in the time he is set. And what an age! Harry is welcomed into the houses of royalty, or we can just as easily find him waking up in a doss house amongst the great unwashed. So I'd like to dig a little deeper into this complicated character and get beyond the qualities Harry quite earnestly conveys of cowardliness, self-serving and lust, which usually drive the stories. It's how Harry reacts when he ends up in the soup that interests me. There are so many examples to choose from, such as spending weeks having to meticulously study every inch of Prince Carl Gustaf's mannerisms, characteristics and history in order that he can impersonate him at his wedding, or planning the taking of the armoury at Harper's Ferry in one night in The Agent of the Lord, or convincing the famous frontiersman Dick Wootton that he could be a wagon captain in Flashman and the Redskins, or in 5 minutes planning the fixing of the duel that he has to fight with Bernier in the first packet Flashman. So in this packet, I'd like to present 3 examples of where Harry was just plain brilliant, where a lesser man would have failed. Number 1. Flash for Freedom. Here we find Harry arriving at New Orleans on a ship under escort from the US Navy, who believe him to be an undercover spy for the British government, who cannot only testify against the slaver crew that he was arresting with, but the powerful high in society US and British owners of the vessel. Right from the off, Harry decides in seconds he'll take advantage of the situation and impersonate the real dead spy, Coma. He is convincing enough to make the US naval officer take him seriously, and on the trip to Baltimore and on to Washington keep up the pretense without tripping over his lack of nautical knowledge. He develops his plausible cover story and sticks to it, repeating it several times over without making any errors to different government men who suspect him. Although he doesn't quite pull the wool over Lincoln's eyes at dinner at the British ambassador's residence, who spots the imposter but doesn't reveal him, and Harry manages to bluff his way through. Harry is taken to New Orleans to be forced to testify, and he knows he has to avoid this or he'll be revealed and end up in a dock with the rest of the slavers. To get away, he forms a new plan of escape, and we get another piece of flashy brilliance. The ship arrives in the morning, which gives him the night before to get ready before he goes ashore the next morning. He carefully prepares his fine clothes that have been stashed in his valet and gather his valuables. The next morning, when arriving on the quay, he is able to easily be lost in the crowd with his luggage. He doesn't run, he simply puts some distance between him and his captors, and rather than take the obvious route of boarding a ship, decides to hold up in New Orleans to plan his next move. His first stop is the barber's to cut his hair, trim his beard and restore his cavalry whiskers, or tart catchers as Flashy puts it. Then he is into a good tailor's and invests most of his spare cash on the right attire to suit the role he intends to play. After that, he visits a printer to have cards made up in the name of Rudy von Starnberg, his new identity. No longer a bearded English scoundrel dressed in naval clothes, now a beautifully dressed Austrian aristocrat speaking French. He then puts into practice some advice he picked up from Paolo Avitable, governor of Peshawar, on his adventure in Afghanistan in the first Flashman packet. He searches out the right knocking shop with the right madam to charm. It's here we meet Susie Willenick, which, shall we say, Harry charms into taking him in. A lot to cover here, but let's break it down a little. So straight after the battle at the Balliol College, he has the presence of mind to weigh the situation and play his card at the right moment. He is creative, intelligent and confident enough to develop his story quickly and to the extent that is plausible to people who obviously are intelligent. Also, to be a good liar, you need to have a good memory. He plans ahead his approach to escape and takes practical steps to carry it out. He shows fantastic acting skills to play 2 completely different roles convincingly, and one in a completely different language. And after that, he uses his considerable charm to find a safe haven. And finally, let's not forget, he is scared inside, because if he ballses all this up, he ends up in the dock, and likely then at the end of a rope. Pretty good going if you ask me. Number 2, The Mountain of Light. It's 1846 and the Punjab is on the brink of war. Harry has been playing spy at the court of Lahore, which has been in a succession turmoil since the death of old Ranjit Singh, who created the mighty 100,000 strong European trained Sikh army, the Khalsa. The British, who at this time do not govern the Punjab, hold Ranjit Singh's £20 million legacy for safekeeping while the different factions jostle for power. At this time the throne is controlled by the old ruler's wife, the Queen Regent Maharani Jindal, with her young son Dalip being the heir. But this control hangs by a thread. She's not popular with the Khalsa, and their loyalty is mainly for her son. Jindal realises that the Khalsa could easily seize power and needs to be removed, and the only power to do that in India is the British. The Khalsa have already brutally murdered her brother, so she decides to send them into the field against Gough's army, ill prepared and led by her lover Lal Singh as wazir and Tej Singh a general, tasked secretly with leading them to defeat and destruction. Harry arrives at the Khalsa encampment at Firozpur and finds Lal Singh gripped with fear and overwhelmed with relief to see Harry, who he believes will be able to tell him how to sell the Khalsa, who are impatient for orders to attack. With vastly superior numbers to the British, there should be no reason to delay. So here's the rub. Flashy has to come up with a plausible battle plan that will put the Khalsa into the weakest position possible and enable the British a fighting chance against overwhelming odds across 2 battlefronts. He also has to find a way for Lal to sell the plan to the well-trained Khalsa without them suspecting. So we have a young Flashman, a junior officer who is inexperienced in battle, faced with a problem of war strategy. Failure, and the British lose the war, and probably India, and likely Harry's life. There's probably a lot more detail I should cover here, but in simple terms, the 3 times as large and far more heavily armed Sikh army is facing 2 British armies, one at Firozpur under Littler, and the second 100 miles away but en route under Gough. The Sikhs need to simply take Firozpur and then wait and face Gough's army when he arrives. Harry weighs the facts and draws on his experience of people and comes up with a plan on the spot which buys the British a fighting chance. Number 1. Don't attack Firozpur because it doesn't matter. Number 2. Divide the Khalsa forces into 3. Number 3. Flashman calculates that none of the 3 parts of the Khalsa are a match for Gough's army. And 4. He also provides Lal with enough plausible excuses as to why this is a great plan to satisfy the Khalsa officers when they are briefed. Not only has Flashman come up with a good strategy, a bit lively, to overcome the Khalsa, he had made it seem sound enough to convince the more experienced Sikh soldiers by giving Lal the reasons why. All this with the consequences of failure lurking in the background. Finally, he is able to put the story back to the British and claim the laurels, although Littler isn't convinced. Number 3. Flashman and the Redskins. Flashman has been taken prisoner by a band of avenging Apaches who have just slaughtered most of Gallatin's famous scalp hunting band, who Harry was travelling with. He wakes after being knocked unconscious to find himself hung upside down alongside a dozen other unfortunates who have also survived the attack. The others are in the process of being horribly mutilated in revenge to the Gallatin gang's attack and scalping of their fellow tribesmen. Harry discovers that he is currently being spared the same treatment by the protests of the chief's daughter, Sonsia Ray, who Harry had protected from the repeated rapes and abuse of her scalp-hunting captives. So it happens that Sonsia Ray has taken quite a shine to Flashy because he fought for her, slew a man, the treacherous Nugent Hare, and used her gently, and on this basis she has decided she wanted to marry him. The rest of the Apache tribe were clearly not as keen, as Harry was just another Americano who deserved a painful death. But what mattered was Sonsia Ray's father's opinion, the great and man-mountain Mangus Colorado, and it was his choice as to whether Sonsia Ray got her man or Harry was to have his skin skillfully removed over a period of days. It's here we begin to see Harry's quick thinking, as Sonsia Ray makes her case to the indulging but imposing father in front of the gathered tribe. The suspicious Mangus asks Harry in his bass voice, "What do you say, Pinder Lekuyi? You have only known her a few hours. What can she be to you?" Harry knows coming on too strong will go the wrong way, So he adapts a Cheyenne phrase he had heard previously and translates it into Spanish, which the Apaches were conversing in. My heart is in the sky when I look at her. Mangus doesn't quite fall for this and asks Harry why he thinks he is a fit man for his daughter. At this point, a failed suitor, Vasco, launches into a passion of protest and states his objection by hurling his hatchet at Harry's feet. Now Harry knows he is not going to be able to handle this killing machine and comes up with a plan on the spot. He decides on a demonstration of tent pegging and challenges Vasco to match him, knowing there is a knack to this. He has to make this convincing even though he hasn't done this for years. He just pulls it off, with Vasco failing miserably and getting wilder and more frustrated on every bungled attempt, essentially making him look a fool, which was Harry's intention all along. In the end, Vasco attacks Harry unawares, and he is only saved by his assigned captor, the Yawner, killing Vasco with a swift and expert slingshotted stone through the eye. After this, Flashman is given the thumbs up by Mangus and is grudgingly accepted by the tribe. More brilliance here by our man. Flashman is able to communicate with the Apaches not only by having the ability to speak Spanish, but by also having the awareness to use phrases and feign bravery that they can understand. He quickly thinks of a way to avoid the fight and has the swagger, horsemanship and lancer skills to implement his plan. So there it is, a few examples of where Flashman wasn't just a pretty face. But what do you think? How about sharing your thoughts on when Harry was just plain brilliant in the comments below? And if this video made you think a little more about our man, why not consider subscribing and giving us a plucky thumbs up? Would you like nuts or a degree in astrophysics, sir?